I thought the worst part would be the guilt. I believed the lectures about how family comes first were the entire fight. But my sister did not just try to steal my vacation. She tried to steal my life. She left a jagged trail that led straight to the police, criminal court, and a truth my parents could not unsee. My name is Caitlin Taylor, and for the last 10 years, I have functioned less like a human woman and more like a load-bearing wall for other people's catastrophes. I am 34 years old. I live in a quiet, second-floor apartment in Richmond, Virginia, that I pay for with a job that slowly drains my will to live. I work as a client operations lead at Juniper and Slate Strategies. It is a fancy title that essentially means I am the person who stands in front of the fan when the mess hits it. I manage expectations. I soothe bruised egos. I organize chaos into neat, color-coded spreadsheets. I am very good at my job because I have been training for it since I was 6 years old. Managing the emotional climate of my own family. By the time this specific Tuesday rolled around, I was running on fumes. I was not just tired, I was cellularly exhausted, but I had a lifeline. For the first time in 3 years, I had carved out something just for me. I had booked a flight to San Juan, Puerto Rico. I can still feel the ghost of that anticipation in my chest. It was not a spontaneous trip. It was a military operation of self-care. I had requested the time off 4 months in advance. I had prepaid for the hotel. A boutique place in Old San Juan with a balcony that looked out over blue cobblestones and bluer water. I had spent hours researching restaurants where I could eat mofongo and drink rum without looking at a single email. I had drafted my out-of-office auto-reply 2 weeks early. It was sitting in my drafts folder, ready to be deployed like a shield. I was going to turn my phone off. I was going to sleep until 10 in the morning. I was going to be Caitlin, the person, not Caitlin, the fixer. The ticket was non-refundable. The hotel was non-refundable. But the most valuable thing I had invested was my hope. 3 days before I was scheduled to head to the airport, I was sitting at my desk at Juniper and Slate, staring at a dual-monitor setup that was currently displaying 4 urgent crises for a client who sold artisanal dog food. My phone vibrated against the mahogany veneer of the desk. It was my sister, Tessa. Tessa Taylor is 37 years old. She is married to a man named Evan who has the personality of room-temperature water, and they have 2 children, Milo and Sophie. I love my nephew and niece. I want to be clear about that. But Tessa does not view children as little humans she is raising. She views them as leverage. My phone vibrated again. A photo of Tessa and me from 5 years ago flashed on the screen. We looked happy in the picture. We looked like sisters. That photo was a lie. I considered letting it go to voicemail. I should have let it go to voicemail. But the conditioning runs deep. When the red phone rings, the Batman picks up. When Tessa calls, Caitlin answers. It is the law of the universe. I slid my finger across the screen and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello," I started to say. I did not get to finish the word. "So here is what you are doing," Tessa said. Her voice was not frantic. It was not the voice of someone in the middle of a medical emergency or a car accident. It was the flat, confident tone of a project manager assigning a task to a subordinate. "You are watching the kids all week." I blinked at my computer screen. The cursor on my spreadsheet blinked back. "Excuse me," I asked. "Evan and I have a thing," she said, breezing past my confusion as if it were a minor pothole. "We need to be away from Monday through Friday. I already told Mom you would handle it. You can pick the kids up from school on Monday at 3. I will drop off their overnight bags on Sunday night." My chest tightened. It was a physical reaction, a constricting of the lungs that I had felt 1,000 times before. It was the feeling of my boundaries being erased. "Tessa," I said, keeping my voice low so my coworkers in the open-plan office would not hear. "I cannot watch the kids next week. I am going away." There was a pause on the line. It was not a pause of realization. It was the pause of a predator recalibrating its attack. Going away where she asked, to Puerto Rico. I said, "I have told you this. I told you this months ago." I sent the itinerary to the family group chat. "I leave on Monday morning." I heard her sigh. It was a loud, theatrical exhale that crackled in my ear. "Okay, well, you are going to have to move it," she said. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that lacked any humor. "I cannot move it. Tessa, the flights are booked. The hotel is paid for. I am leaving on Monday. Caitlin, do not be difficult," she snapped. "This is an emergency. Every single event in Tessa's life is an emergency. A flat tire is a tragedy. A lost debit card is a national crisis. A mild headache is a reason to summon the family council." "What is the emergency?" I asked. "I do not have time to go into the details," she said, her voice rising. "The point is, I need you. The kids know you. They are comfortable with you. I cannot leave them with just anyone." I took a deep breath. I looked at the little sticky note on my monitor where I had written the countdown, 3 days to paradise. "I am sorry." "Tessa," I said, and for the first time in years, I actually meant the word no. "I cannot do it. I am going on this trip." Silence stretched between us. It was heavy and dangerous. "So you are choosing a beach over your family?" she asked. Her voice had dropped an octave. This was the guilt frequency. "I am choosing the vacation I paid $3,000 for," I said. "Listen, if you need a sitter, I can help you find one. I have a list of agencies from when I helped you last summer. I will even chip in. I will pay $500 toward a professional nanny for the week. How about that?" It was a generous offer. It was an absurdly generous offer considering she was demanding my labor for free. "I do not want a stranger in my house," Tessa spat. "Why would I pay a stranger when you are right there?" "I am not right there," I said, my voice rising enough that the intern 2 desks over looked up. "I am going to be in Puerto Rico." "You are selfish," Tessa said. "You have always been selfish. You think because you are single and you have that fancy job that you can just do whatever you want. You have no idea what it is like to have real responsibilities. I have a job. Tessa, I have bills. You have a hobby," she corrected. "Raising children is a job. Being a mother is a job. You are just playing house in that apartment. You need to step up." "I am stepping up," I said. "I am stepping onto a plane." She hung up on me. I stared at the phone. My hands were shaking. I put the device down on the desk and tried to focus on the dog food client. But the adrenaline was coursing through me. I knew it was not over. The phone call was just the opening salvo. Tessa was the field commander. But she had generals. 30 minutes later, the text messages started. First, it was my mother. Tessa called me crying. "I cannot believe you would do this to her. She is under so much stress. Caitlin, you know how hard she works." Then, 5 minutes later, "Can't you just reschedule the trip? The airlines are flexible these days. Your sister needs you." I typed back, "Mom, the tickets are non-refundable. I am going." Then came my father. He did not text. He called. I let it go to voicemail. But I listened to it immediately. His voice was gruff, the tone of a man who hates being involved in drama but hates disobedience even more. "Caitlin, call your sister back and fix this. We're a family. We help each other. I don't want to hear about you running off to an island when there's a crisis here. Handle it." I sat in my ergonomic office chair and felt the full weight of them settle onto my shoulders. The family machine, a perfectly calibrated system built to grind down my resistance. Tessa supplied the tears, Mom supplied the guilt, Dad supplied the authority, and I was supposed to supply the compliance. I was the fuel. If I didn't burn myself to keep them warm, then I was defective. But something in me had finally given way. Maybe it was the work burnout. Maybe it was the fact that I hadn't slept past 7 in the morning for 6 months. Maybe it was simply the nerve of Tessa telling me to cancel a trip I'd been dreaming about, so she could go do whatever vague, half-explained thing she suddenly needed to do. I didn't call Tessa back. I didn't answer my father. That night, I went home and packed my suitcase anyway. I smoothed my swimsuits flat, folded them with care, and zipped the bag like I was sealing a decision. I packed my sunscreen. I packed the 3 paperback novels I intended to read on the beach. The next 2 days were a barrage of noise. Tessa sent me photos of the kids looking sad with captions like, They were asking for Auntie Kate today. My mom left 3 voicemails, each one more passive-aggressive than the last. She talked about how she raised us to be close, how disappointed she was that I had become so cold. I almost broke. That is the sad truth. On Sunday night, standing in my kitchen, looking at my packed bag, I almost called the airline to cancel. The guilt is not just an emotion in my family. It is a religion. It is woven into the DNA. I felt like I was committing a crime by putting my own oxygen mask on first. But I looked at the mirror in my hallway. I looked at the dark circles under my eyes. I looked at the person I was becoming, a woman who apologized for existing. No, I said to the empty apartment. On Monday morning, I took an Uber to the airport. I turned my phone on airplane mode the second I sat in my seat. As the plane taxied down the runway, I watched Richmond disappear beneath the clouds. I felt a surge of triumph. I had done it. I had escaped. I spent 7 days in San Juan. I wish I could say I forgot about them completely, but that would be a lie. The silence from my phone when I reconnected to the hotel Wi-Fi was deafening. No one wished me a safe flight. No one asked how the ocean looked. There was just a cold, stony radio silence. But I drank my rum. I ate my mofongo. I walked the blue streets and let the sun burn the office fluorescent pallor off my skin. I told myself that they would get over it. We would have a big fight when I got back. I would apologize for being unavailable, and things would return to the status quo. I thought I had won a battle for my independence. I did not know that while I was swimming in the Atlantic, the war back home had gone nuclear. I landed back in Richmond late Sunday night. "She didn't tell you," Rains said. "It wasn't a question. She sent you here to trip the wire. If you are the one holding the book when the police arrive, you are the one who gets tagged with the possession of illicit assets. She is clearing the board, Luna, and she is using you as the sacrifice." I looked at the glass doors. I could hear sirens in the distance now, a low wail rising over the hills of Mason's Ferry. They were coming for me. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. I thought about the note Grandpa had hidden in the chess book. Ask for full history. Do not trust family. He knew. He knew they would do this. That was why he told me to come. He wasn't sending me to jail. He was sending me to the truth. But he had to throw me into the fire to make me see it. He knew I would never believe him if he just wrote it down. I had to feel the handcuffs. I had to see the fear in the banker's eyes. I looked at Rains. "You helped her," I said. I pushed the key in. It stuck. I had to jiggle it, force it, before it finally turned with a heavy clunk. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the smell of a closed-up apartment. It was the smell of intrusion, stale air, disturbed dust, and something else, a faint, lingering scent of perfume that I recognized instantly. I flipped the light switch. My living room was not how I left it. It wasn't trashed in the way a burglar trashes a place. Drawers weren't dumped on the floor. The TV was still mounted on the wall. It was subtler, and somehow more violating. The couch cushions were askew. The cabinet where I kept my important paperwork was slightly ajar. My laptop charger was missing from the side table. I stood there, gripping the handle of my suitcase, the Puerto Rican sand still in the bottom of my bag. And I realized that the argument 3 days before I left hadn't been the end of anything. It had been the beginning. I thought I had just asserted a boundary. I didn't know I had declared war. I dropped my bag and walked to the kitchen counter. There was a stack of mail there. I sorted through it with trembling hands until I found 2 envelopes that made my blood run cold. If you think this ends with a family argument, wait until you hear what showed up on my credit report and on my company's security report, to understand why the scratches on my lock felt like a physical blow rather than just a property crime. You have to understand that Tessa was not always the villain in my story. In fact, for the first 2 decades of my life, she was the hero. We were not just sisters. We were a closed circuit. Tessa is 3 years older than me, and when we were children, that gap felt like a canyon of wisdom. She was the loud one, the fierce one, the one who threw sand at the boy who made fun of my glasses in the 2nd grade. I was the quiet shadow, the observer, the one who smoothed things over. She broke things, and I fixed them. It was a dynamic that worked. I felt safe in her orbit because I believed that her ferocity was a shield that extended to cover me. I have a specific memory from when I was 16 and she was 19. I had failed a math test, a catastrophic event in the Taylor household, and I was terrified to go home. Tessa drove me to a diner, bought me a milkshake with her own waitressing money, and looked me in the eye. She told me that one test did not define me. She told me she would handle Mom and Dad, and she did. She absorbed the blast so I could stay safe. I hold on to that memory tightly. I turn it over in my hands like a polished stone because it is the only proof I have left that she used to love me without conditions. The shift was not an explosion. It was a slow, creeping erosion. It started 7 years ago, right after she married Evan. Then came Milo. Then came Sophie. Motherhood changed Tessa. It stripped away her patience and replaced it with a frantic, sharp-edged martyrdom. I understood that parenting was hard. I saw the sleepless nights and the constant demands. So, naturally, I stepped in. I wanted to help. I was the doting aunt who showed up with casseroles and offered to hold the baby so she could shower. But somewhere along the line, the gratitude evaporated. The thank yous became fewer and farther between, eventually disappearing altogether. My help stopped being a gift and started becoming a line item in her budget. The narrative in the family shifted. Because I was single. Because I did not have children. My time was treated as a limitless natural resource that belonged to the collective. It started with the phrase I grew to hate more than any other combination of words in the English language. You are flexible. Tessa would say it while looking at her phone, not even making eye contact. You are flexible. Caitlin, you can push your dinner plans. You are flexible. Caitlin, you can work late another night. The first time it really stung was Milo's 3rd birthday. Tessa called me at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. She needed me to pick him up from daycare because she was stuck at a hair appointment that was running long. I was at work. I was in a meeting. I whispered that I could not leave. Her voice turned into ice. She said that I did not understand what it was like to be a mother. She said that when I had real responsibilities, I would understand why hair appointments were not just vanity, but necessary mental health maintenance. She weaponized her stress against my career. I left the meeting. I picked up Milo. I was praised for it later by my mother, who told me I was such a good sister for pitching in. That was the trap. The praise was the bait. Over the next 3 years, the requests escalated in both frequency and audacity. It was never a request for a favor anymore. It was a summons. Can you watch Sophie for 2 hours became an entire Saturday. Can you grab some milk on your way over became a full grocery run that I never got reimbursed for. If I hesitated, even for a second, the weapon came out. Tessa would sigh, a sound that carried the weight of the world, and say the line that always worked. You have no idea how hard this is. You go home to a quiet apartment. You sleep through the night. You just do not get it. My parents reinforced this hierarchy with military precision. In the Taylor family architecture, Tessa was the struggling saint because she had procreated. I was the supporting character. My job was to make the saint's life easier. If I told my dad I was tired from a 60-hour work week, he would chuckle and say that I did not know the meaning of tired until I had a sick toddler. If I told my mom I had a date, she would ask if I could reschedule it, because Tessa really needed a break this weekend. My time was counterfeit money. Hers was gold. About a year ago, the resentment started to curdle into something toxic. I am an operations lead. I live my life by data. When something feels wrong at work, I pull the logs. I analyze the patterns. So, I started a spreadsheet. I named it Project Boundaries, password protected it, and saved it deep in my personal drive. Column A was the request. Column B was the promised time commitment. Column C was the actual time spent. Column D was the financial cost to me. The data was horrifying. In a single 6-month period, I had spent 142 hours watching her children. I had spent nearly $800 on food, gas, and emergency supplies that were never repaid. But the most damning column was the one I added last. Column E, reciprocity. In that same 6-month period, I asked Tessa for exactly one favor. My car was in the shop, and I needed a ride to the mechanic, a 15-minute drive from her house. She told me she couldn't do it because it would disrupt Sophie's nap schedule. I took a cab. I realized then that this was not a relationship. It was an extraction. I was a mine, and they were stripping me of everything of value until I was hollow. I sat in the break room at Juniper and Slate one afternoon, staring at the spreadsheet on my phone. Elena, one of our senior analysts, sat down opposite me. Elena is a woman who does not believe in sugarcoating. She saw my face and asked what was wrong. I showed her the numbers. I told her about the guilt trips. I told her about the constant refrain that my life was easy because it was child-free. Elena looked at me over the rim of her coffee mug and said something that changed my brain chemistry. She said that I was not a sister to them. I was a third parent who did not get a vote. She told me that free labor disguised as love is still labor, and if they were not willing to pay for it with even a scrap of respect, I needed to go on strike. That was the day I booked Puerto Rico. I did not book it just because I wanted a tan. I booked it because I needed to prove to myself that I could exist outside of their demands. I needed to know that I could spend 7 days without solving a crisis I did not create. It felt like oxygen. The mere idea of that trip was the only thing keeping me upright during the weekly family dinners where I was ignored until someone needed a refill on their drink. I was terrified they would try to sabotage it. I knew their patterns. I knew that if I left any room for ambiguity, Tessa would drive a truck through it. So I treated the notification of my trip like a legal deposition. I told them 4 months out. I sent a screenshot of the flight confirmation to the group chat. Booked San Juan, January 19th to the 26th. I will be totally unreachable. My mom sent a thumbs-up emoji. Tessa did not reply. 3 months out. I brought it up at Sunday dinner. I reminded them I would be gone. I told them specifically that I would not be around for the school run that week. Tessa was feeding Sophie pasta and nodded. She heard me. I saw her eyes register the information. 1 month out. I sent a calendar invite to both my parents and Tessa. Caitlin, away. Puerto Rico. Tessa accepted the invite. I thought I had done enough. I thought that if I overcommunicated, if I laid the concrete thick enough, she could not drill through it. I thought that surely, even Tessa, with her infinite capacity for entitlement, would respect a prepaid international trip. I was naive. I did not understand that to Tessa. My plans were not concrete walls. They were suggestions. They were placeholders until she decided she had a better use for my time. When she called me 3 days before the trip, the call that started this entire nightmare, she was not forgetting my schedule. She was ignoring it. She had looked at the calendar, seen that I was free from work, and decided that my freedom was an asset she could liquidate. She knew. She knew exactly what she was doing. She waited until the last possible second because she thought the pressure of the ticking clock would make me fold. She thought that if she dropped the emergency in my lap 48 hours before takeoff, my conditioning would kick in. She banked on the fact that Caitlin the fixer would never abandon the family. She was right about the pressure. It almost crushed me. But she was wrong about the result. As I stood in my violated apartment, looking at the evidence of her intrusion, the warm memories of the sister who bought me a milkshake faded into black. The nostalgia soured instantly, turning into bile in the back of my throat. She had not just tried to cancel my vacation. She had decided that if she could not control my time, she would violate my space. She felt entitled to my apartment in the same way she felt entitled to my Saturday nights. I looked at the empty spot where my laptop used to be. I looked at the drawers that had been pulled open by hands that used to braid my hair. The sadness vanished. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I was done being the backup plan. I was done being the flexible one. I walked over to the security camera I had installed in the corner of the living room, the one disguised as a smoke detector, the one I had never told anyone in my family about because I feared they would call me paranoid. I pulled out my phone and opened the app. I did not want to see what was on there, but I needed to know the truth. I needed to see the moment my sister stopped being family and started being a felon. I tapped the screen to load the footage from 3 days ago. The loading circle spun for a second, a small digital eye blinking open. Then, the video started to play. The silence after Tessa hung up the first time did not last long. It was a tactical silence, a brief ceasefire designed to let my anxiety marinate before the next assault. When my phone lit up again, I stared at the name on the screen. It was Tessa again. She was not done. She had just needed a moment to reload. I slid my thumb across the screen. I did not say hello. I just listened. The sitter canceled, Tessa said. Her voice was different this time. The command tone was gone, replaced by a frantic, breathless cadence that I had heard 1,000 times before. It was her crisis voice. It was designed to bypass my logic centers and hit me directly in the empathy. She sent me a text 20 minutes ago. Caitlin, she has the flu. She cannot come. I sat down on the edge of my sofa. My suitcase was standing by the door like a sentinel, a physical reminder of the reality I was fighting to keep. Okay, I said slowly. That is unfortunate. Tessa, I am sorry she is sick, but I do not understand why this is a conversation we are having. If the sitter is sick, then you stay home. That is how parenting works. You are not listening to me, she practically shrieked. It was a sharp, jagged sound that made me pull the phone away from my ear. Evan and I have non-refundable deposits on this cabin. It is our anniversary week. We have been planning this for months. We deserve this. Caitlin, we deserve a break. I rubbed my temples. The headache was starting behind my left eye, a dull throb that synchronized with my heartbeat. I have been planning my trip for months, too. I said, I have non-refundable tickets, too. Why does your deposit matter more than mine? Because this is for our marriage, she argued. God, you are so dense sometimes. We need this time. We are drowning. And on top of that, the kids are off school next week for teacher work days. I cannot work with them in the house for 5 straight days. And Evan cannot take off because he is in the middle of a quarter-end review. We are stuck. We are completely stuck unless you step up. I took a deep breath. The logic was so twisted it was almost impressive. She had built a house of cards, and because a wind blew it down, she expected me to stand there and hold up the roof with my bare hands. Tessa, I said, keeping my voice steady, almost clinical. You are asking me to forfeit $3,000 and my only week off this year because your backup plan failed. That is not a request for help. That is a demand for a sacrifice. It is not a sacrifice, she insisted. It is family. You are acting like I am asking you to donate a kidney. I am asking you to hang out with your niece and nephew for 5 days. They love you. They have been asking for you. Stop, I said. Do not bring the kids into this. This is not about them missing me. This is about you not wanting to lose your deposit. This is not my emergency. Tessa, this is you trying to relocate the consequences of your bad luck onto my life. There was a pause. The line went dead silent for 3 seconds. I had used a work phrase, relocate consequences, and I could feel her processing the shift in my tone. I was not speaking to her as a little sister anymore. I was speaking to her as a project manager who had identified a critical failure in someone else's department. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped. It was icy. It was the voice she used when she wanted to hurt. So that is it. Then she asked softly, Your little beach trip matters more than your niece and nephew. You are going to choose a margarita over helping raise these children. I squeezed my eyes shut. I am not choosing a margarita. I said, I am choosing the boundary I set 4 months ago. You are unbelievable, she spat. Then the line clicked. She hung up. I lowered the phone and looked at the black screen. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I did not have time to recover. Not even a minute later. The phone buzzed again. It was Mom. The coordination was impressive. It was a blitzkrieg. Tessa had clearly called her immediately. Sobbing, spinning the narrative before I could even get a word in, I answered, Caitlin. My mother's voice was tight. It was the voice she used when she was trying to control a situation that was spiraling. It was low, clipped, and brooked no argument. Tessa just called me. She is a wreck. She is hyperventilating. I am sure she is. I said, she is very upset that I told her no. You cannot tell her no on this. Caitlin, Mom said, not this time. She is at the end of her rope. Evan told me she has been crying herself to sleep because of the stress. They need this getaway. I need a getaway too. Mom, I said, I am burned out. I have not slept properly in months. You are single, Mom said. The words were automatic. It was a reflex. You can go another time. You can go next month. Or in the summer. Puerto Rico is not going anywhere. The island will still be there. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. My money will not be there. Mom, I said, I paid for this. It is done. Money is just money, she said dismissively, as if I had endless reserves of it buried in my backyard. We can talk about the money later. Maybe Dad and I can help you out with a little bit of it later. But right now, your sister needs you. Cancel the flight. Call the airline right now. If you do it quickly, maybe you can get a credit. She was not asking. She was instructing. In her mind, the hierarchy was absolute. Tessa's needs were the sun, and I was just a planet expected to adjust my orbit. I cannot do that. Mom, I said, Caitlin Marie, she warned, do not be stubborn. You are being very difficult. I am not being difficult. I am being an adult with a schedule. I am hanging up now. Mom, I said, I need to finish packing. I ended the call before she could respond. I felt a wave of nausea. Hanging up on my mother was a violation of the natural order. It felt like walking out of church in the middle of a sermon. I stood up and walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water. My hands were shaking. I drank the water in one long gulp, trying to wash down the lump in my throat. Then the phone rang again. Dad. I stared at it. I considered not answering. I considered turning the phone off and throwing it into the bottom of my bag. But I knew that would only delay the inevitable. If I did not answer, he would come over. He had a key. He would show up at my door and block the exit physically. I answered, I didn't raise you to be this way. He said, no hello, no preamble, just the judgment, heavy and suffocating. Hello, Dad, I said, I didn't raise you to choose vacations over family. He continued. His voice was a low rumble. It was the voice of the patriarch, the man who believed his word was law. Your sister is in a bind. She reached out to you for help, and you are throwing a tantrum about a hotel room. It is not a tantrum, I said. It is $3,000. Watch your tone, he snapped. I do not care about the money. I care about character. And right now, you are showing very poor character. Caitlin, you are showing me that you are selfish. You are showing me that you do not care about anyone but yourself. The word selfish hit me like a physical slap. I had spent my entire life bending myself into pretzels to be selfless. I had spent weekends painting their fences, evenings babysitting their grandchildren, hours listening to their complaints. I am not selfish. I said, my voice trembling slightly, I am exhausted, and I gave everyone 4 months of notice. Notice he scoffed. Life doesn't run on a schedule. Caitlin, emergencies don't give notice. Family steps up when things go wrong. That is the deal. That is the contract. If you walk away from this, if you get on that plane while your sister is struggling, you are making a statement. You are saying you are separate from us. I closed my eyes. Tears pricked at the corners, hot and stinging. Maybe I am separate, I whispered. What he barked. I said no. Dad, I am going. There was a stunned silence on the other end. He had expected me to crumble. He had expected the weight of his disappointment to crush my resolve, just like it always did. If you go, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, do not expect us to be happy to see you when you get back. You are burning a bridge here. Caitlin, then I guess I will swim, I said. I hung up. I dropped the phone onto the counter. It clattered loudly against the granite. I leaned over the sink, breathing hard, gasping for air like I had just surfaced from deep water. I had done it. I had said no to all 3 of them, but the phone was not done. A text message chimed. Then another. Then another. It was Tessa. She had switched tactics. The pleading was gone. The anger was gone. Now, it was pure venom. Don't be surprised when people see who you really are. I am going to post about this. I am going to let everyone know that you left us high and dry. Hope the beach is worth losing your family. I looked at the messages, and suddenly, the nausea stopped. The shaking stopped. A strange, cold calm settled over me. I realized something in that moment. Standing in my kitchen under the harsh fluorescent lights, they were not asking me for a favor. They never had been. They were assigning me a shift. To them, I was not an independent human being with my own desires and needs. I was an employee of the Taylor Family Corporation who had tried to request time off during a blackout period. My vacation was not a valid life event to them. It was insubordination. They did not love me less because I was leaving. They were furious because their appliance was malfunctioning. I felt a click in my brain. It was the sound of a latch sliding into place. I picked up the phone and turned it off completely. I did not just lock the screen. I powered it down. The screen went black, swallowing their threats and their guilt trips. I walked out of the kitchen and into my bedroom. I went to my nightstand. There was a drawer there that I usually kept locked, not because it held anything illicit, but because it held things that were private, things that were mine. I opened the drawer. Inside, sitting on top of my passport, was a thick white envelope. I reached in and picked it up. My fingers brushed the smooth paper. I looked at it for a long moment, a bitter smile touching the corner of my lips. I had been so excited about what was inside this envelope. I had spent weeks imagining the look on their faces. I had imagined the tears of joy, the hugs, the moment where I finally proved that I was not just the fixer, but the provider of joy. I opened the flap and slid out the contents: 2 additional round-trip tickets to San Juan, Puerto Rico. Passenger Robert Taylor, passenger Linda Taylor. I had bought them weeks ago. I had upgraded their seats. I had booked them a room in the same hotel, just down the hall from mine. I had planned to surprise them at dinner tonight, to hand them the envelope and say, "Come with me. Let's all go. Let's celebrate your anniversary in the sun." I had wanted to give them the world. I had wanted to treat them. But they did not want a treat. They wanted a servant. I looked at the tickets, calculating the thousands of dollars I had spent, the overtime I had worked to afford this gesture of love. I slid the tickets back into the envelope. I did not rip them up. I did not throw them away. I set the envelope gently on top of my dresser, right next to my jewelry box. I was still going to Puerto Rico. And now, I knew exactly what I was going to do with these tickets. I stood there in the dim light of my bedroom, the 2 tickets heavy in my hand. They were printed on standard printer paper, folded into thirds, but they felt like loaded weapons. I looked at the names Robert Taylor, Linda Taylor. I had bought them 3 weeks ago. It was supposed to be a surprise for their 35th wedding anniversary, which had passed with little fanfare 2 months prior because Tessa had been dealing with a minor plumbing issue that naturally took precedence over a 3-decade milestone. I had saved my bonus for this. I wanted to give them the thing they always claimed they couldn't afford: rest. I looked at my phone. It was still powered down. A black slab of glass on the dresser. I had 2 choices. I could tear these tickets up, go to Puerto Rico alone, and accept that I was now the family pariah. Or I could play the card. I turned the phone back on. It took a moment to boot up. The screen flooded with notifications, missed calls from Dad, a wall of texts from Tessa, but I ignored them all. I navigated to my recent calls and tapped the entry for my parents' landline. My father picked up on the second ring. "I am not interested in hearing excuses. Caitlin," he said. His voice was still hard, still carrying the momentum of his previous lecture. "If you are calling to tell me you are still going, save your breath." I did not apologize. I did not soften my voice. I did not engage with his anger at all. "Check your email." "Dad," I said. There was a pause. The confusion in his silence was palpable. What he asked. "I just forwarded you a confirmation email," I said. Open it. I heard the rustle of movement, the sound of him putting the phone on speaker, the squeak of his office chair. I heard my mother in the background, asking what I was saying, her voice shrill with residual irritation. Just open it, Linda, I heard him say. A few seconds of silence stretched between us. I listened to the hum of the line, my heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Then, the tone changed. Oh my God! My mother gasped. Her voice was not tight anymore. It was breathless. What is this? My father asked. But the growl was gone. In its place was the tentative, stumbling tone of a man who realizes he has walked into the wrong room. It is your anniversary present, I said flatly. 2 tickets to San Juan. First class. The hotel is the same one I am staying at. I booked you the oceanfront suite. There was a long, stunned silence. It was the sound of a narrative collapsing. They had spent the last 3 hours building a monument to my selfishness, constructing a story where I was the villain abandoning the family in a time of crisis. And now, with one PDF file, I had bulldozed the entire structure. You bought us tickets? Mom asked. Yes, I said. I booked them weeks ago. I was going to surprise you at dinner tonight. I thought you deserved a break. I thought, since you are always talking about how tired you are, you might want to see the ocean. I waited for the apology. I waited for them to say, "Oh, Caitlin, we are so sorry we yelled at you. We are sorry we called you selfish. We are sorry we tried to bully you." That apology never came. Instead, the atmosphere on the other end of the line shifted instantly from judgment to jubilant entitlement. Bob. Look at these seats, Mom practically squealed. Row 2. We have never flown row 2. I haven't been to Puerto Rico since the 80s. My dad said, his voice rich with sudden, booming good humor. Do they still have that rum distillery? We have to go to the distillery. I closed my eyes. It was like watching a magic trick. The crisis involving Tessa, the sick babysitter, the stranded grandchildren, it all evaporated. It ceased to exist. The urgent moral imperative of family first had vanished the second the definition of family expanded to include their own pleasure. Wait, Mom said, panic creeping in. But it was the good kind of panic. The flight is Monday. Caitlin, I have nothing to wear. My swimsuit from last year is stretched out. We have to go to the mall tomorrow. Bob, you need sandals. You cannot wear those old sneakers. The transition was so fast it gave me emotional whiplash. 5 minutes ago, I was a traitor for leaving. Now, I was the golden child because I was taking them with me. What about Tessa? I asked. I needed to ask. I needed to hear them say it. There was a brief hesitation on the line, a micropause where I could hear the gears turning in their heads, weighing the abstract concept of helping Tessa against the concrete reality of a prepaid luxury vacation. Oh, she will figure it out, my dad said breezily. You know your sister. She always lands on her feet. Besides, Evan is there in the evenings. They can manage. She has the flu. Linda, my dad added, talking to my mom now. We can't go over there anyway. We don't want to get sick before the flight. Right. Mom agreed. It wouldn't be responsible to expose ourselves right before a trip. We will just send her a nice fruit basket. I felt a cold hollowness open up in my stomach. It was sickening. They were abandoning Tessa with the exact same ease they had just used to condemn me. It wasn't about principle. It was never about principle. It was about convenience. I will see you at the airport on Monday, I said. I hung up before they could thank me. I didn't want their gratitude. It felt cheap. I sat on my bed for a long time, staring at the wall. I had won, but it felt like a loss. I had bought my way out of the villain role. I had paid $3,000 to prove that their loyalty was up for auction. An hour later, the text from Tessa arrived. My parents had evidently called her immediately to share their good news. I can only imagine that conversation. Sorry we can't watch the kids. Honey, but Caitlin got us first-class tickets. Isn't that wonderful? The phone vibrated. Cute. Buying loyalty. Guess I know where I rank. I stared at the words. She wasn't asking for help anymore. She wasn't begging me to reconsider. There was no mention of the kids, or the sick sitter, or the anniversary cabin, and that was when the second twist hit me. Tessa wasn't furious because she was stuck with the children. She was furious because she had lost control of the story. For years, she had been the protagonist of the Taylor family drama. She was the one with the struggles, the one with the needs, the one who directed the flow of resources and attention. By refusing to fold, and then by taking our parents with me, I had not just inconvenienced her, I had upstaged her. I had taken the audience away from her performance. She didn't want me to babysit so she could go away. She wanted me to babysit so she could confirm her status as the person whose time mattered most. I didn't reply. I didn't type out a defense. I didn't remind her that she had tried to cancel my trip first. I didn't point out that she could have hired a nanny with the money she was spending on her own trip. I just let the text sit there, unanswered. I locked my phone and went to sleep. Monday morning was a blur of gray sky and drizzle. I took a rideshare to the airport alone. I met my parents at the check-in counter. They were vibrating with excitement. My mother was wearing a new sun hat, oblivious to the fact that we were standing in a fluorescent-lit terminal in Virginia. My father was loudly telling the check-in agent that his daughter pointing at me had treated them. They looked at me with beaming pride. The daughter who stepped up, the daughter who provided. They did not mention Tessa. It was as if she had been erased from the family tree for the duration of the week. I smiled, I nodded, I played the part. But underneath my skin, I felt a strange, creeping dread. It wasn't the guilt anymore. The guilt was gone, replaced by something sharper. It was the feeling you get when you walk past a growling dog and the growling stops. You don't feel safe. You feel like the attack is imminent. Tessa was not the kind of person who accepted defeat. She was the kind of person who redefined the rules of the game until she won. Her silence over the last 24 hours was not resignation. It was planning. We boarded the plane. I turned left into the cabin. Finding my seat in row 3, right behind my parents, I watched them settle in. Mom accepted a pre-departure sparkling wine. Dad started fiddling with the entertainment system. I looked out the window at the rain streaking against the glass. The engines whined to life, a rising scream that vibrated through the floor. I was escaping. I was going to Puerto Rico. I had my parents. My job was secure, and my out-of-office reply was active. But as the plane accelerated down the runway, pushing me back into my seat, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. I felt like I had just stepped off a ledge, thinking I was learning to fly. But somewhere back in Richmond, in a house full of screaming children and a simmering, rejected sister, I knew the truth. I hadn't flown. Someone was just waiting for me to land so they could push. The plane lifted off. The ground fell away. I closed my eyes. But I didn't see the beaches of San Juan. I saw the look in Tessa's eyes from the last time I saw her. A look that said, "This isn't over. This is just the beginning." I had no idea how right she was. I had no idea that while I was sipping champagne at 30,000 feet, the first dominoes were already falling back home. The humidity in San Juan was not like the oppressive, wet wool blanket of a Virginia summer. It was sweet. It smelled of roasting pork, exhaust fumes, and salt spray. When I stepped out of the airport and the air hit my face, I felt a physical dismantling of the tension that had been holding my skeleton together for the last 6 months. My shoulders dropped 3 inches. The knot between my shoulder blades, which my massage therapist had named the corporate lump, finally began to dissolve, for the first time in years. I was not Caitlin the fixer. I was just a woman in a linen dress standing on a curb, waiting for a taxi to take me to a place where no one knew my phone number. The transformation in my parents was almost immediate, and frankly, it was disorienting. I had spent so much of my adult life managing their anxieties and their expectations that I had forgotten who they were before they became the grandparents-in-chief. By the second day, my mother had abandoned her usual fretful posture. She stood on the balcony of our hotel in Old San Juan, looking out at the pastel-colored buildings and the deep blue cut of the Atlantic. And she started to cry. It was not the manipulative weeping she used to guilt me into Sunday dinners. It was pure, unadulterated awe. She kept touching the railing and saying she could not believe she was really here. She wore the big sun hat I had helped her pick out at the airport. And she looked 10 years younger. My father was even worse, in the best way possible. He had turned into a caricature of a tourist. He stopped every 10 feet to take photos with his phone, holding it out at arm's length, squinting at the screen, cutting off the tops of historic cathedrals, and capturing mostly his own thumb. He laughed at everything. He laughed when he tripped on a cobblestone. He laughed when the waiter brought him a drink that was served inside a hollowed-out pineapple. See, he told me over dinner that first night, gesturing, with a forkful of plantains, "This is living, Katie. This is what it is all about." I watched them, and I felt a complicated mix of affection and resentment. It was easy to be a happy family when the bill was paid and the responsibilities were 4,000 miles away. I realized that my parents were not inherently miserable people. They were just people who required a very expensive environment to be pleasant. I tried to let the resentment go. I tried to drink my mojito and focus on the sound of the coqui frogs chirping in the night air, but the silence from Richmond was loud. I checked my phone constantly. I told myself I was checking for work emails, or to look up reviews for coffee shops. But I was lying. I was checking for Tessa. I expected a barrage. I expected long, scrolling texts detailing the misery of her week. I expected photos of the children crying. I expected her to lash out at me for stealing Mom and Dad. But there was nothing. The chat thread with her remained frozen on that last bitter text. "Guess I know where I rank." The silence felt heavier than the humidity. It felt tactical. Tessa was the kind of person who needed the last word. If she was not speaking, it meant she was doing something else. On Wednesday, my mother posted a photo to Facebook. It was a selfie of the three of us in front of the Castillo San Felipe del Moro. The wind was whipping my hair across my face. My dad was grinning like a maniac, and my mom looked radiant. She captioned it, "Paradise, with my favorite people. So blessed to be here for our anniversary." I watched the likes roll in. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors. Everyone was commenting on how great they looked, how jealous they were. Tessa viewed the story. I saw her name on the list. She did not like the photo. She did not comment. "Did she see this?" Mom asked me at breakfast. Scrolling through the comments for the 50th time. Tessa didn't comment. She probably just scrolled past it. I lied. "She is busy with the kids. Remember?" My mother frowned for a second, a shadow passing over her face. But then the waiter arrived with fresh papaya, and the shadow vanished. She chose the papaya over the problem. That was the theme of the week. I tried to follow her lead. I tried to immerse myself in the sensory details of the island. We walked the blue cobblestone streets. We toured the rum distillery, where my father drank 3 samples and told the tour guide a very long, very boring story about his college days. We swam in water so clear I could see the polish on my toes while treading water. But the real world has a way of scratching at the door, even in paradise. It started on Thursday afternoon. I was lying on a lounge chair by the hotel pool, reading a trashy novel, when my phone buzzed on the small table next to my sunscreen. It was a notification from my email provider. Security alert. Attempted login blocked. I frowned and sat up, shielding my eyes from the glare. I opened the email. It said that someone had tried to access my personal email account from a device labeled Windows PC. I use a MacBook. My work computer is a MacBook. I stared at the location data. Richmond, Virginia. My stomach gave a small, uncomfortable lurch. My first thought was hacking. I thought about data breaches, about all those news stories where millions of passwords get leaked on the dark web. Then I thought of Tessa. But that was ridiculous. Tessa did not know my email password. And even if she did, why would she be logging in to delete my flight confirmations? The trip was already half over. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself it was probably a glitch, or maybe my old laptop, which I had given to my dad years ago, had woken up and tried to sync something. I tapped the button that said, Not me. Changed my password to something complicated involving 14 characters and a symbol, and put the phone back down. I refused to let a digital hiccup ruin my tan. The second scratch came on Friday. We were at a late lunch, eating fried snapper. My phone chimed with a priority notification. It was from my bank. Action required address. Verification request. I opened the app. There was a message in my inbox asking me to confirm a request to update my billing address for a credit card. I rarely used a backup card I kept in a drawer at home for emergencies. I stared at the screen. I had not requested an address change. I looked up at my parents. My dad was trying to explain the concept of American football to our waiter. My mom was laughing. If I mentioned this, the bubble would burst. My dad would go into panic mode. My mom would start fretting about identity theft. The golden haze of the vacation would evaporate, replaced by the gray anxiety of administrative problems. I swiped the notification away. I will call the bank on Monday. I told myself, it is probably a phishing scam. It is probably nothing. I shoved the phone deep into my tote bag. I ordered another drink. I forced myself to smile, but that night, as I lay in the hotel bed, listening to the ocean crash against the rocks below, the dread settled in my chest. It wasn't the sharp panic of a crisis. It was the low-frequency hum of intuition. Something was moving back home, while I was static, suspended in this bubble of leisure. Something in my real life was shifting. On our final night, we went to a high-end restaurant with white tablecloths and candles that flickered in the ocean breeze. My parents made a toast to Caitlin. My dad said, raising his glass, "Thank you for this." We needed this more than we knew. I clinked my glass against theirs. I looked at them, really looked at them. They were good people, flawed and frustrating, but good, and I realized that I had changed. I was done being the martyr. I was done being the person who set herself on fire to keep them warm. This trip had proven that the world did not end if I took a break. It proved that my money was better spent on experiences than on bailing my sister out of her daily chaos. "I am glad you came," I said, and I meant it. I slept soundly that night. I felt resolved. I felt like I was returning to Richmond with a new suit of armor. The flight back was uneventful. We landed in a gray, drizzling Virginia afternoon. The temperature shock was rude 50 degrees and damp. We said our goodbyes at the baggage claim. My parents were taking a cab to their house in the suburbs. I was taking a rideshare to the city. "Call us when you get in," Mom chirped, hugging me tight. She smelled like coconut sunscreen and duty-free perfume. "I will," I promised. I watched them walk away, hand in hand, dragging their suitcases. They looked happy. I felt a surge of pride that I had given them that. I walked out to the curb and waited for my car. The ride to my apartment took 30 minutes. I watched the familiar streets roll by the brick row houses, the coffee shops, the gray winter trees. The vacation already felt like a fever dream. Something that had happened to a different version of me. The car pulled up in front of my building. "Have a good night," the driver said. "Thanks," I said. I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk and wheeled it up the wet pavement. I was tired. All I wanted to do was order Thai food, take a hot shower, and sleep in my own bed. I walked into the lobby. It was empty. The air smelled of floor wax and old mail. I took the elevator to the second floor. The hallway was quiet. I walked down to Unit 2B. I stopped in front of my door. At first, I didn't register it visually. It was a tactile thing. I reached into my purse and pulled out my keys. I held the silver key, the one with the blue rubber cap, and I reached for the lock. My hand froze. The metal plate around the keyhole looked chewed. There were scratches, tiny, jagged silver marks on the brass, radiating out from the center like a frantic starburst. I frowned. That wasn't right. I was careful with my keys. I didn't scratch my own door. I pushed the key in. It didn't slide in smooth like butter, the way it had for the last 3 years. It met resistance. It felt gritty. I had to jiggle it. I had to shove it. A cold drop of sweat rolled down my spine, unrelated to the temperature in the hallway. The key turned with a heavy, sickening clunk that sounded wrong. It sounded loose. I stood there for a second, my hand still on the key, my suitcase handle in the other hand. My brain was trying to process the information, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe the super changed the cylinder. Maybe someone tried to pick it. I pushed the door open. It swung inward silently. The air that rushed out to meet me was not the stale, closed-up air of an empty apartment. It smelled of something else. It smelled of fresh coffee, and underneath that, the distinct, floral cloying scent of the perfume my sister had worn since high school. My heart stopped. I stepped across the threshold, and the dread I had been ignoring in Puerto Rico finally caught up with me. It didn't just catch up. It tackled me. I looked into my living room, and I knew, instantly and with terrifying clarity, that the lock wasn't the only thing that was broken. The door clicked shut behind me, locking automatically. The sound echoed in the hallway, final and heavy, but I was already moving. I dropped the handle of my suitcase. It fell to the hardwood floor with a loud thud that I barely registered. I stood in the center of my living room, my hands trembling at my sides, trying to process the visual data in front of me. My apartment is small, but I keep it with the precision of a showroom. Everything has a place. The coasters are stacked. The throw pillows are karate chopped in the center. The magazines are aligned by edge. It is a controlled environment because the rest of my life, my job. My family is so often uncontrollable, but the room I was standing in now looked like it had been shaken by a giant hand. It was not trashed. That was the first thing my brain tried to categorize. It was not the violent, mindless destruction of a burglary where thieves rip the TV off the wall and smash vases just for the noise. There was no broken glass. The television was still mounted. My expensive sound system was still on the shelf. This was different. This was a search. Every single drawer in my media console was pulled out to its stopper, hanging open like a dead tongue. The contents batteries, manuals, spare cables were sifted through, tossed casually onto the rug. The couch cushions had been stripped from the sofa and thrown into the corner, as if someone had been looking for something hidden in the lining. The bookshelf was decimated. Books were pulled off the shelves and fanned open, then left face down on the floor. I walked further in, my boots crunching on a stack of printer paper that had been dumped from my desk. My desk. I stopped. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and lightheaded. My workstation was in the corner by the window. Usually, it held my docking station, my dual monitors, and my company-issued laptop. The monitors were there. The dock was there. The laptop was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, bird-like rhythm. That laptop contained sensitive client data for Juniper and Slate. It had encrypted files. It had access keys to our internal servers. Losing it was not just an inconvenience. It was a firing offense. It was a security breach of the highest order. I spun around, panic rising in my throat like bile. Maybe I took it. I whispered to the empty room. Maybe I put it in the closet before I left. I ran to the hall closet. I ripped the door open. My winter coats were pushed aside. The shoeboxes on the floor were opened. Lids scattered. No laptop. I ran to the bedroom. It was the same violation. My dresser drawers were open. My underwear. My socks. My t-shirts. They had all been touched, lifted, checked, dropped. The jewelry box on top of my vanity was open. I looked inside. My grandmother's pearl necklace, the one thing of true value I owned, the one thing I wore to every wedding and funeral, was gone, but the gold hoop earrings right next to it. Still there. The diamond studs my ex-boyfriend gave me, still there. I gripped the edge of the dresser, my knuckles turning white. A random burglar does not leave diamonds and take a laptop and a specific strand of pearls. A random burglar does not ignore the 60-inch television in the living room. This was targeted. This was personal. For a second, I thought I might vomit. The violation felt physical, like hands on my skin. I backed out of the bedroom, retreating to the kitchen island, needing something solid to put between me and the wreckage of my sanctuary. My eyes darted around the room, looking for logic, looking for a sign that I was wrong, and then, I saw it, high up in the corner of the living room, nestled on top of the kitchen cabinets, was a small, white circle, the camera. I had installed it 4 months ago after a package was stolen from the lobby. I had bought a 2-pack, one for the front door, which I knew about, and one for the interior, which I had set up mostly to keep an eye on the maintenance guys when they came to fix the AC. I had never told anyone about the inside camera, not my parents, not Tessa. To them, it was just a smoke detector or a motion sensor. I scrambled for my phone. My fingers were shaking so badly I typed my passcode wrong twice. I finally unlocked it and opened the security app. I went to the timeline. I scrolled back. Thursday. I saw the gray bar of the timeline turn into a blue bar, indicating motion. Thursday. 10:14 in the morning. I pressed play. On the small screen of my phone, I watched the grain of the video resolve into a clear picture of my living room. The sun was streaming in through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The front door opened. It didn't burst open. It wasn't kicked in. It opened smoothly, confidently, though I could see the slight jiggle of the handle first, the way you do when a key is sticky. And then, Tessa walked in. I stopped breathing. I knew it was her. I knew it the moment I saw the lock, the moment I smelled the perfume. But seeing the digital proof rendered in high definition was a shock that hit me with the force of a car crash. She was wearing her yoga pants and a gray oversized sweatshirt. Her hair was in a messy bun. She didn't look like a criminal. She looked like she was walking into her own house. She didn't look around nervously. She didn't check the corners for people. She just walked in, closed the door behind her, and locked it. I watched, frozen, as my sister walked into my kitchen. She opened my refrigerator. She stood there for a moment, scanning the shelves, and then she took out a bottle of sparkling water. My sparkling water. She cracked it open, took a long sip, and then walked into the living room. She sat down on my couch. She took her phone out of her pocket and sent a text. I felt a wave of nausea. I remembered Thursday. I remembered the silence. While I was lying by the pool in Puerto Rico, wondering why she wasn't texting me, she was sitting on my sofa, drinking my water, dismantling my life, on the screen. Tessa stood up. She put the phone away, and then the work began. It wasn't a rage-filled trashing. She didn't throw things. She was methodical. She walked to the media console and opened the first drawer. She rifled through it, her hands moving fast but steady. She was looking for something specific. She pulled out a stack of papers, my tax returns from 2 years ago, flipped through them, and then tossed them on the floor. She moved to the next drawer. She moved to the desk. I watched her pick up my laptop. She didn't hesitate. She didn't check to see if it was mine or the company's. She just closed the lid, unplugged the power cord, and shoved it into the large tote bag she had brought with her. She opened the file organizer on my desk. She pulled out the folder labeled Personal. This was where I kept my birth certificate, my social security card, my lease. She took the whole folder. She walked out of the frame, heading toward the bedroom. I fast-forwarded the footage. 2 minutes later, she walked back out. She was holding the pearl necklace. She held it up to the light, inspecting the clasp, and then dropped it into her pocket. Then, she did something that made the blood freeze in my veins. She walked back to the kitchen to get her water bottle. As she turned, she looked up. She looked right at the top of the cabinets. She looked right at the camera lens. She didn't gasp. She didn't cover her face. She didn't run. She narrowed her eyes. She looked annoyed. It was the look she gave a slow barista or a driver who cut her off. It was a look of mild irritation that she was being observed, but absolutely zero fear of the consequences. She stared at the camera for a solid 3 seconds. Then, she rolled her eyes, grabbed her tote bag, and walked out the front door. The video ended. I stood in the silence of my apartment. The sun had gone down outside, and the room was filled with shadows. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a sister snapping under pressure. This was an execution. She had come here to punish me. She had come here to take the things that gave me security, my job, my identity documents, my sentimental treasures, because I had dared to use my security to say no to her. She wanted to show me that nothing I owned was really mine if she decided she wanted it. I felt something inside me break. It was the last tether of loyalty I'd been holding on to. The Caitlin who wanted to fix things, the Caitlin who wanted to keep the peace, died in that moment. I did not cry. I did not scream. I walked to the kitchen counter. I picked up my phone. I dialed 3 numbers. 911. I waited for the operator. My voice, when I spoke, sounded like it belonged to a stranger. It was calm. It was professional. It was the voice I used when I was presenting a quarterly review to the board of directors. Emergency services. Which service do you require, police? I said, I need to report a break-in. I have video evidence of the intruder. I gave them my address. I gave them the details. I told them I would wait outside. Then, I made the second call. I called my parents' cell phone. They would be home by now. They would be unpacking their souvenirs, maybe pouring a glass of wine, basking in the afterglow of the trip. My dad answered on the first ring. Hey, Katie, he boomed. We just got in. The traffic on I-95 was a bear. But we made it. Did you get home okay, Dad? I said. Something in my tone must have cut through his good mood, because he went silent instantly. What's wrong? He asked. Are you okay? I need you to come to my apartment. I said, right now. Why it is late? Caitlin. I need you to come here. Dad, I interrupted, and I need you to bring Mom. Do not call Tessa. Do not text Tessa. Just get in the car and come here. Caitlin, you are scaring me. My mom's voice came from the background. What is going on? I am not going to explain it over the phone. I said, I just sent you a video file. I want you to watch it while you drive over here. A video, Dad asked, confused. Just watch it, I said. I hung up. I walked over to the door, stepping over the pile of papers Tessa had discarded. I opened the app again and exported the clip. I sent it to my father. Then I walked out into the hallway to wait for the police. 20 minutes later, 2 cruisers pulled up to the curb, their blue lights flashing silently against the brick of my building. 5 minutes after that, my parents' sedans screeched to a halt behind the police cars. I watched them get out of the car. I have seen my parents angry. I have seen them disappointed. I have seen them tired. I had never seen them look like this. My mother looked like she had aged 10 years in the 20-minute drive. She was holding on to my father's arm as if she couldn't stand up on her own. My father looked gray. He looked like a man who had been punched in the gut and was still trying to remember how to breathe. They saw the police cars. They saw me standing by the open door of the lobby, my arms crossed over my chest, my face stone. They walked up the path. They didn't run. They walked with the heavy, dragging steps of people walking toward a funeral. Caitlin, my mom whispered when she got close enough. Her eyes were red. I didn't hug her. I didn't step forward. Did you watch it? I asked. My dad nodded. He couldn't speak. He looked at the police officer standing next to me, a tall man with a notepad. This is Officer Miller, I said, gesturing to the cop. I was just giving him the statement. I told him that the intruder is my sister, Tessa Taylor. I told him that you can identify her from the footage. Caitlin, my mom sobbed, reaching for my hand. Please, it is a mistake. She didn't mean, she meant every second of it. Mom, I said, pulling my hand away. You saw her face. You saw her drink my water. You saw her take my laptop. But police, my dad croaked. Caitlin, this is your sister. We can handle this internally. We can get the things back. You don't have to do this. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had lectured me about character 3 days ago. I looked at the man who had told me I was selfish for wanting a vacation. I looked him dead in the eye. She stole my client data. Dad. She stole my identity documents. She stole Grandma's pearls. She broke into my home while I was paying for you to drink rum on a beach. I turned to Officer Miller. These are my parents. I said, they can confirm that the woman in the video is Tessa Taylor. They are going to tell you where she lives. I stepped back, opening the space between us. Tell him. Dad, I said. My father looked at me. He looked for the daughter who fixed things. He looked for the daughter who smoothed it over. He didn't find her. He looked at the officer. He took a shuddering breath. He slumped, his posture collapsing under the weight of the undeniable truth I had forced him to witness. "Her name is Tessa Taylor," he whispered. "She lives at 409 Maplewood Drive." I turned around and walked back toward the elevator. I had a police report to finish filing, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the one to clean up the mess. Officer Miller was young, perhaps only a few years older than me, but he had the weary eyes of a man who had refereed enough domestic disputes to know that blood is not thicker than water, it is just stickier. He stood in the center of my living room, his notebook open, his pen hovering over the paper. The air in the apartment was heavy, suffocatingly still, broken only by the occasional sniffle from my mother, who was sitting on the edge of the ottoman because the couch cushions were still scattered on the floor. "Does she have a key?" Officer Miller asked. His voice was neutral, stripped of judgment. "No," I said. I was standing by the kitchen island, my arms wrapped around my torso as if I could physically hold myself together. "I changed the locks 4 months ago. There was an incident in the building, a package theft, and I upgraded the deadbolt. I never gave her a copy. I never gave anyone a copy." "And you did not give her permission to be here?" he asked, writing something down. "You did not ask her to check on the apartment, water plants, or feed a pet?" I shook my head. "No. I explicitly told her I would be away. She knew I was in Puerto Rico. She asked me to babysit, and I refused. That was the last time we spoke." My mother made a small, wounded noise. It was the sound of a balloon slowly deflating. "Caitlin," she whispered, "are you sure? Maybe she thought she was helping." I turned to look at my mother. She looked small. The vibrant woman who had been drinking piña coladas in a sun hat 24 hours ago was gone. In her place was a terrified parent trying to reconcile the image of her 2 daughters, one the victim, one the perpetrator. "Mom," I said, my voice flat. "You watched the video. You saw her roll her eyes at the camera. People who are helping do not steal laptops. People who are helping do not take tax returns." My father was standing by the window, staring out at the dark street. He had not said a word since he gave the officer Tessa's address. His silence was not the passive silence of avoidance. It was a heavy, dangerous thing. It was the silence of a man watching a foundation crack. He was a man who believed in order, in rules, in the hierarchy of family. Tessa had not just broken the law. She had humiliated him. She had proven that his authority meant nothing to her. "So, this is a breaking and entering," Officer Miller said, closing his notebook with a snap that made my mother flinch. "And given the value of the items taken, the laptop, the jewelry, we are looking at grand larceny. We will need to process the scene. We will take the video file into evidence. We will likely issue a warrant for her arrest or bring her in for questioning tonight. Do you wish to proceed with pressing charges?" The question hung in the air. This was the off-ramp. This was the moment where, in 1,000 other family dramas, the victim backs down. It is just a misunderstanding. "We will handle it." I looked at the empty space on my desk where my livelihood used to sit. "Yes," I said, "I want to press charges." My mother buried her face in her hands. My father turned from the window. He looked at me, his face gray, and gave a single, stiff nod. He did not object. He did not ask me to reconsider. He knew. Officer Miller nodded. "Okay. I am going to call in a tech to dust for prints near the point of entry in the desk. Just to be thorough, although the video is quite damning." As he reached for his radio, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, expecting another vitriolic text from Tessa, or maybe a neighbor asking about the police lights. It was not a text. It was a call. The caller ID read, "Juniper and Slate. Security Ops." My stomach dropped so hard I felt it in my knees. It was 8 o'clock at night on a Sunday. Corporate security does not call on Sunday nights unless the building is burning down. I picked up the phone. My hand was shaking. "This is Caitlin," I said. "Caitlin, this is Marcus from Information Security," a voice said. It was not a friendly voice. It was the voice of a man who is paid to protect the company from liabilities. "We have a situation. We flagged a massive data exfiltration attempt on your credentials about 48 hours ago. We tried to reach you, but your phone was unreachable." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I was in Puerto Rico." I stammered. "I was on vacation. My phone was off." "We know you were out of the office," Marcus said, his tone cutting. "That is why the activity was flagged. But the access came from your IP address in Richmond. Someone logged into the secure client portal using your credentials. They accessed the restricted folders for the Sterling account. They tried to export 3 gigabytes of proprietary strategy documents to an external drive." I closed my eyes. The room seemed to tilt. The Sterling account. That was our biggest client. It was the account I led. If that data was leaked, if the strategy documents, the budget projections, the private internal memos were made public, it would be a catastrophe. It would be a lawsuit. It would be the end of my career. "Marcus," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice, "listen to me. My apartment was broken into. My company laptop was stolen. I am standing here with the police right now." There was a pause on the line. "The laptop was stolen," Marcus asked. "Was it encrypted?" "Yes," I said. "But," I swallowed hard. "I have a physical notebook with some passwords written down in my desk drawer. It was also taken. This was a violation of protocol. It was a fireable offense to write down passwords. But I had done it because the system required password changes every 30 days, and I could never remember them all. Tessa must have found it. She must have found the notebook and the laptop and decided to see what she could find. This is serious." "Caitlin," Marcus said, "we have to lock out your entire identity. We have to assume a total breach. I have to report this to legal immediately, if that data gets out." He did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. "I will send you the police report number as soon as I have it." I whispered, "I did not do this. Marcus, I swear." "I know," he said, "but the access happened from your home, on your machine, with your login. Until we prove otherwise, you are the point of failure." The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone. I felt cold. I felt like I was standing naked in a snowstorm. What my dad asked. His voice was sharp. He had seen my face. That was my job. I said, my voice sounded hollow, "Tessa didn't just take the laptop to sell it. She turned it on. She used my passwords. She accessed the client database." My father's eyes widened. He understood corporate structure. He understood liability. He knew exactly what I was saying. She hacked your work," he asked. "She tried to download files." I said, "They think I leaked data. Dad, they could fire me. They could sue me for negligence." I turned to Officer Miller, who was watching the exchange with interest. "You need to add something to the report," I said. My voice was trembling, but it was loud. This wasn't just theft. It was industrial espionage, or at least, unauthorized access to a protected server. She used the stolen laptop to access my employer's database. Officer Miller raised his eyebrows. "When did this happen?" I looked at the call log Marcus had mentioned. "Thursday, 2:10 in the afternoon." I pulled up the video timeline on my phone again. Thursday, 2:10 p.m. There it was. Tessa was sitting on my couch. The laptop was open on her lap. She was typing. She wasn't just browsing. She was working. She looked focused. She looked like she was hunting. I showed the screen to the officer. "Look," I said, pointing to the timestamp. "She is on the computer right there." That matches the security log from my company. Officer Miller nodded slowly. He understood the gravity. This wasn't just a sister stealing a necklace anymore. This was a documented chain of evidence linking a burglary to a potential corporate crime. "We will need those logs," he said. "Can you get your IT department to send over the timestamps I can try?" I said. My mother stood up. She was shaking. "Why would she do that?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why would she touch your work?" "Caitlin, she knows how hard you worked for that promotion. She knows how important that job is to you." I looked at my mother. I saw the confusion in her eyes. She still wanted to believe that Tessa was just stressed, just overwhelmed, just acting out. She did it because she could. Mom, I said. She did it because she wanted to hurt me. She knows my job is the one thing I have that she doesn't. She knows it is my independence. She wanted to smash it. My father walked over to the ottoman. He sat down heavily next to my mother. He put his head in his hands. I didn't raise a criminal, he muttered, but the conviction was gone. He sounded like a man trying to convince himself of a lie. The forensic tech arrived 10 minutes later. He was a quiet man with a large metal case. He started dusting the doorframe. He dusted the edge of the desk. I stood in the kitchen, watching black powder settle on the surfaces I kept so clean. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The police were thorough. They took the video file. They took the serial number of the laptop. They took the description of the pearls. By the time they left, it was nearly 10 o'clock. Officer Miller handed me a small card with a case number on it. "We are going to pay Ms. Taylor a visit tonight," he said. "Given the video evidence, we have probable cause for an arrest. Do you want to be notified immediately, or should we wait until morning notify me?" I said. He nodded and left. My parents stood up. They looked like ghosts. We should go," my dad said. He couldn't look me in the eye. He looked defeated. "Are you going to call her?" I asked. My dad shook his head. "No. If the police are going there, it is out of our hands." He walked to the door. My mother followed him. She stopped in the doorway and looked back at me. "I am so sorry. Caitlin," she whispered. I didn't say it was okay. I didn't say I forgave them. I just nodded. They left. I locked the door behind them. I engaged the deadbolt. It felt flimsy now. It felt like a suggestion rather than a barrier. I was alone. I walked back to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. But I couldn't bring myself to open the fridge. I kept thinking of Tessa opening it. I kept thinking of her mouth on my water bottle. I grabbed a glass from the cupboard and filled it from the tap. I leaned against the counter, listening to the silence of the apartment. My job was hanging by a thread. My sister was about to be arrested. My parents were broken. I thought I had hit the bottom, but then my phone chimed again. It was an email, not from work, not from the police. It was from a credit monitoring service. New inquiry alert. I stared at the screen. I felt a numbness spreading through my fingers. I opened the app. There was a hard inquiry on my credit report. Dated Friday. Application for quick cash personal loan. Amount $5,000. Status. Pending review. I dropped the glass. It shattered on the floor, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. I didn't move to clean it up. I just stared at the notification. She hadn't just raided my apartment. She hadn't just sabotaged my job. She had tried to take out a loan in my name. She had tried to leverage my credit score, the one thing she always mocked me for obsessing over, to solve her own financial mess. The address verification email from the bank in Puerto Rico suddenly made sense. She wasn't just changing an address. She was trying to reroute the mail so I wouldn't see the bills. Tessa didn't just cross a line. She had poured gasoline on the line and lit a match. She had started a fire in every single room of my life, my home, my career, my finances. I stood in the middle of the broken glass, and for the first time since I walked in the door, I felt something other than shock. I felt a cold, hard rage. She wanted a war. She had one. The speed at which a lie travels through a family is roughly 10 times faster than the speed of light. By the time the sun came up on Monday morning, the narrative had already been poured, set, and hardened into concrete by the Taylor family rumor mill. According to my Aunt Carol, who left me a voicemail at 7 in the morning, I was having a mental breakdown. According to my cousin Sarah, I had given Tessa a key weeks ago, asked her to check on my plants, and then snapped and called the police in a fit of jealous rage because I was single and miserable. Tessa had gotten ahead of the story with the efficiency of a wartime propagandist. She was telling anyone who would listen that she was being framed, that I had set her up, that I was punishing her for being a mother while I lived my selfish, child-free life. She was fighting for her reputation. I was fighting for my reality. I did not respond to the texts. I did not return Aunt Carol's call. I sat in my kitchen, drinking black coffee. staring at the shattered remains of the glass I had dropped the night before. I had swept it into a pile but had not thrown it away yet. It felt like a necessary piece of evidence. At 9 o'clock, my phone rang. I expected it to be the police. It was Evan. Tessa's husband is a man who has spent his entire adult life trying to be invisible. He is the kind of guy who nods at everything, agrees with everyone, and disappears into the garage whenever the volume in the house goes above a whisper. He had never called me on my personal line without Tessa being in the room. I picked up. "Evan," I asked. "Caitlin," he said. His voice sounded like it was coming from inside a tunnel. It was shaky and thin. I am at the Starbucks on Broad Street. Can you meet me? Tessa doesn't know I'm calling." I hesitated. My instinct was to say no. My instinct was to tell him to talk to my lawyer, even though I didn't have one yet. But there was something in his voice, a desperation that sounded genuine. "I will be there in 20 minutes, I said. I walked into the coffee shop with my sunglasses on. I felt exposed. Like everyone in Richmond knew that my sister was a thief, and I was the sister who turned her in. I found Evan sitting in a booth in the back corner. He looked terrible. He had not shaved, and his eyes were rimmed with red. He was clutching a paper cup like it was the only thing anchoring him to the earth. I sat down opposite him. I did not take off my sunglasses. "I am not dropping the charges, Evan," I said. "So if that is why you are here, you can save the speech." He flinched. He looked down at his coffee. "I know," he whispered. "I didn't come here to ask you to drop them. I waited. I came here because—" He took a deep breath, and when he looked up, his eyes were wet. "I didn't know she would do that. Caitlin, I swear to God, I knew she was stressed. I knew she was angry about the trip, but I didn't know she was going to break in." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "You knew she was angry, Evan. She tried to take out a $5,000 loan in my name. She stole my identity documents. That is not anger. That is strategy." Evan closed his eyes. A single tear leaked out and tracked through the stubble on his cheek. "It is not just strategy," he said softly. "It is panic. What are you talking about?" "She is in debt, Caitlin," he said. "Deep debt." I frowned. "What kind of debt?" "You guys make good money. You have the house. You have the cars." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "We have the payments. We don't have the money. Tessa, she has been hiding things. Credit cards I didn't know about. Store accounts. Overdrafts. She manages the finances. And I let her. I didn't want to fight." He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "I found a notice in the mail last week. A final warning from a collection agency. It was for $12,000 when I confronted her. She blew up. She told me she would fix it. She said she had a plan." I stared at him. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening snap. The refusal to hire a sitter. The demand that I babysit so they could go on a cheap trip. The rage when I said no. And then, the break-in. She wasn't just looking for cash. I realized aloud. She was looking for a bailout. She stole my laptop to find my banking passwords. She took the tax returns to get my social security number. She was going to use my credit to pay off her secret debt before you found out the extent of it. Evan nodded miserably. She thought because you have money, because you are single, that you wouldn't notice, or that if you did, you would just absorb it, like you always do." I felt a cold fury rising in my chest. It was not the hot anger of betrayal anymore. It was the cold anger of being dehumanized. To Tessa, I wasn't a sister. I was an asset class. I was a liquidity event waiting to happen. She told me she was just going over to check on the place. Evan said, "She told me she needed to borrow a dress. When she came back with the laptop, she told me you lent it to her. She said you guys made up. And you believed her?" I asked. He looked away. I wanted to believe her. It was easier than asking questions. I stood up. I looked down at this man who had let his wife cannibalize her own family because he was too afraid to look at the bank statements. "You are going to have to talk to the police. Evan," I said, "you are going to have to tell them about the debts, because if you don't, they are going to find out anyway, and it is going to look a lot worse for both of you." I walked out of the coffee shop. I didn't look back. 2 hours later, Detective Miller called me down to the precinct. They had executed the search warrant. They had visited 409 Maplewood Drive while Tessa was dropping the kids off at school. I walked into the evidence room, and there it was, my life, laid out on a metal table, my laptop, my grandmother's pearls, my folder of documents. But it wasn't a clean recovery. The laptop looked battered. There were scratches on the lid. We found it in the bottom of the kitchen trash can, buried under coffee grounds. Miller said, "She tried to toss it when she saw the cruisers pull up." My heart stopped. "Is it working?" "The tech is looking at it now," he said. "But physically, it is intact." The bad news is, the drive appears to have been wiped. She tried to do a factory reset. I felt the blood drain from my face. A factory reset. She had tried to erase the evidence of her login, not realizing or not caring that she was also erasing the client data, the strategy documents, the years of work I had stored on that machine. She didn't just steal it, I whispered. She destroyed it. "We also found this," Miller said. He held up a plastic bag. Inside was a piece of paper. It was a page from my notebook, the one with the passwords. It had been crumpled up and shoved into a cereal box in her pantry. "Panic," Miller said. "She wasn't a professional criminal. Ms. Taylor, she was desperate. Professionals don't hide evidence in Lucky Charms." He led me to an observation room. Through the one-way glass, I saw her. Tessa was sitting at a metal table. She wasn't wearing handcuffs yet, but she looked cornered. Her hair was messy, her face was pale, but her eyes were still defiant. I listened to the audio feed. I was just borrowing it. She was yelling at the detective. "We are sisters. We share everything. I have a key. She gave me a key years ago. We spoke to the building super." "Mrs. Taylor," the detective said calmly. "He confirmed the locks were changed in September, and we have a statement from your sister saying you had no permission. She is lying." Tessa screamed. "She is trying to ruin me because she is jealous. She is jealous of my kids. She is jealous of my marriage." "Then why did you apply for a loan in her name?" the detective asked. He slid a piece of paper across the table. "Why did we find a credit application time-stamped 20 minutes after you entered her apartment?" Tessa stopped. Her mouth opened, then closed. The family shares defense hit the brick wall of forensic accounting. You can argue that a necklace is borrowed. You cannot argue that identity theft is a sisterly favor. I watched her crumble. It wasn't a graceful collapse. She slumped in the chair, crossed her arms, and stared at the wall. "I want a lawyer," she muttered. I turned away from the glass. I couldn't watch anymore. It wasn't satisfying. It was just sad. I walked out into the hallway and found my parents sitting on a bench. They had been called in to give statements. They looked like they had survived a bombing. My mother was clutching a tissue that was shredded to confetti. My father was staring at the floor. They had heard. They knew about the debt. They knew about the loan application. They knew that their narrative of Tessa the martyr was a lie. I stood in front of them. "She told us," my dad said, his voice raspy. "She told us you gave her the laptop. She told us you wanted to help her out with some bills. And you believed her," I asked, "just like Evan did." "We wanted to," Mom whispered. We wanted everyone to get along. That is the problem." I said, "You wanted peace so badly that you didn't care who had to pay for it. You let her take from me for years because it was easier than telling her no. And now she thinks she can take my identity because she feels entitled to everything I have." I looked at them, and I made a choice. I could scream at them. I could demand an apology that would never be big enough to cover the damage, or I could set a boundary that would last forever. "I am not going to stop this," I said. "I am going to testify. I am going to give the DA everything they need. And if you ask me to drop this, if you ask me one time to do it for the family, I will walk out of your lives and I will never come back." My father looked up. He looked at the daughter he had tried to bully 3 days ago. He saw the steel in my spine. "We won't ask," he said quietly. We can't ask. Not after this." "Good," I said. The door to the interrogation room opened. 2 officers led Tessa out. She was in handcuffs now. She looked up and saw us. She saw me standing tall. She saw our parents sitting with their heads bowed, refusing to make eye contact with her. "Caitlin," she shouted. "Caitlin, tell them it was a misunderstanding. Think about Milo. Think about Sophie. You are going to send their mother to jail." The mention of the kids was a punch to the gut. I love those kids, but I looked at her, and I realized that she was the one holding the weapon. She was the one using her children as human shields to protect her own greed. I didn't speak. I didn't step forward. I watched the officers guide her down the hall toward booking. I turned to my parents. "I'm going to call Evan." I said, "I am going to tell him that I will pay for therapy for the kids. I will buy them school clothes. I will send them birthday gifts. But I will not set myself on fire to keep Tessa warm anymore." I walked out of the police station and into the bright, cold afternoon sun. My phone buzzed. It was Marcus from IT. We got the laptop back. The text read, "Forensics is attempting a recovery. It looks like the wipe wasn't total. You might have a chance. Caitlin, but legal is still swarming." I took a deep breath. I had a chance. Tessa was formally charged that evening. Grand larceny, identity theft, computer fraud. The family shattered instantly. Half the cousins blocked me on social media. My aunt sent me a Bible verse about forgiveness, but as I stood in my apartment that night, looking at the empty spot on my desk, I knew the hardest part wasn't over. The police work was done, but the legal system is a slow, grinding machine. Tessa would get a lawyer. She would plead not guilty. She would drag this out, and I would have to sit in a courtroom, look my sister in the eye, and tell 12 strangers that the person I used to share a bedroom with was a criminal. I locked my door. I checked the camera. I was ready. The weeks leading up to the court date were not filled with the dramatic screaming matches one might expect from a television drama. Instead, they were filled with a suffocating, static tension that felt like waiting for a hurricane to make landfall. The silence was heavy, but the noise from the periphery was deafening. At first, the extended family grapevine buzzed with the frantic energy of a hive that had been kicked. My phone became a lightning rod for unsolicited opinions. Aunt Carol, a woman who had not sent me a birthday card in 6 years, left a 3-minute voicemail telling me that I was being dramatic. She used that word specifically, dramatic, as if filing a police report for grand larceny was the same thing as crying because someone wore the same dress as you to a wedding. My cousin Sarah sent a long, emoji-filled text about how sisters fight, and how family is forever, and how I needed to be the bigger person because Tessa was, in her words, going through a lot. I did not engage in arguments. I did not type out paragraphs defending my sanity. I simply replied with facts. She stole my identity. Sarah. She tried to take out a $5,000 loan in my name. I have the video. The response to that was always the same silence. The moment the existence of the video and the security logs was mentioned, the flying monkeys of the Taylor family retreated. It is easy to defend a stressed-out mother when the accusation is vague. It is much harder to defend a woman who looks into a camera lens with contempt while shoving her sister's livelihood into a tote bag. The truth was a cold splash of water that sobered everyone up, leaving them embarrassed and quiet. But Tessa did not go quiet. She changed her strategy. The aggression I had seen in the text messages, the "I know where I rank" bitterness, evaporated. In its place, she constructed a fortress of victimhood. She wasn't a thief anymore. She was a martyr who had been pushed to the brink. I heard it from my mother. I heard it from Evan. During our brief, stilted text exchanges about logistics, Tessa was telling anyone who would listen that she was simply overwhelmed. She spun a narrative where I was the wealthy, carefree bachelorette living in a luxury apartment, hoarding resources, while she was drowning in the noble, exhausted work of raising the next generation. She told people she only went to my apartment to find financial documents because she was trying to save her family from ruin, and that I had turned a cry for help into a criminal crusade. It was a sickening distortion of reality. She was weaponizing her incompetence to villainize my stability. I sat in the office of Assistant District Attorney Reynolds on a rainy Tuesday morning. Reynolds was a sharp woman with gray hair cut into a bob and a desk buried under manila folders. She did not look like someone who had patience for family theatrics. She laid out the case on her desk. It was clinical. It was mathematical. It stripped the emotion out of the betrayal and left only the skeleton of the crime. "We have the video footage of the entry and the theft," Reynolds said, tapping a flash drive with her pen. "We have the IT logs from your employer confirming the unauthorized access and the attempted data exfiltration. We have the recovery report of the laptop from the trash can, and we have the credit inquiry time-stamped to the minute she was in your home." She looked up at me over her reading glasses. "This is not a he said, she said. Ms. Taylor, this is a slam dunk. The defense is likely going to push for a plea deal to avoid jail time. Citing her lack of prior criminal history and her status as a primary caregiver, they will ask for probation and restitution." I looked at the stack of evidence. It looked like a dossier on a stranger. "What about the work data?" I asked. "My company. They are still auditing the files." Reynolds nodded. "That is the sticking point. The attempted data theft elevates this. If she had just taken the pearls, it would be simple theft. But accessing a secure corporate server that shows premeditation and sophistication, it makes it hard for her to argue she was just borrowing things. You do not borrow encrypted client files." I felt a cold knot in my stomach. Seeing it laid out like that, I realized how close I had come to losing everything. If I hadn't had that camera, if I hadn't had those logs, I would have been fired. I would have been the one facing a lawsuit. Tessa hadn't just tried to steal my money. She had been willing to burn down my future to keep herself warm. "I want to proceed," I said. The pressure from my parents came 3 days before the hearing. They came to my apartment. They looked older. The tan from Puerto Rico had faded, replaced by the gray pallor of sleepless nights. They sat on my couch, the same couch Tessa had defiled, and they tried, one last time, to broker a peace treaty. "Caitlin," my mother started, her voice trembling, "we are not asking you to forgive her. We know what she did was wrong, but court, a criminal record. She will never get a good job again. It will follow her forever. She should have thought about that before she put my social security number on a loan application." I said. I was sitting in the armchair, keeping a physical distance from them. "She is your sister," my dad said. His voice was rough. He wasn't angry anymore. He sounded defeated. "Doesn't that count for anything? Can't we handle this within the family? Evan is selling his motorcycle. They are going to pay you back. Every cent." I looked at them. I saw 2 people who were desperate to keep the illusion of their happy family intact. They wanted to sweep the shards under the rug so they could pretend the vase wasn't broken. I took a deep breath. I knew I had to say the thing that would end this conversation forever. I looked my father in the eye. "Dad," I said, "if she had broken into this house and stolen your retirement fund, if she had hacked into your pension account and tried to drain it, if she had stolen Mom's wedding ring, would you be sitting here asking me to call it family?" The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed in the background. My father opened his mouth to answer, to say yes, of course, but the lie died in his throat. He was a man who valued financial security above almost anything. If anyone else had touched his money, he would have hunted them down. He looked away. He couldn't answer. "That is what I thought," I said softly. "You are asking me to absorb a loss you would never accept for yourselves. You are asking me to be the sacrifice again, and the answer is no." They left 10 minutes later. They didn't slam the door. They closed it quietly, like they were leaving a hospital room where someone had just died. And in a way, someone had. That night, alone in my apartment, I didn't grieve for my laptop. I didn't grieve for the stress of the investigation. I grieved for my sister, not the woman who was currently out on bail, slandering me to the neighbors. I grieved for the memory of her. I grieved for the version of Tessa I had carried in my head for 30 years, the big sister who protected me, the ally who understood me. I realized with a crushing weight that that person didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never had. Maybe I had invented her to justify the way I let her use me. I cried then. I cried for the death of the sisterhood. I cried because I knew that no matter what the judge decided, I had already lost. But Tessa wasn't done twisting the knife. Even under legal scrutiny, even with a no-contact order in place that forbade her from reaching out to me. She found a way to cross the line. She knew she couldn't text me. She knew she couldn't call me. So she used the only clean assets she had left. The children. 2 days before court, I received a text from Evan. He had been trying to stay neutral, trying to navigate the wreckage, but he was weak. Tessa wanted me to send you this. The message read, she didn't tell me to, but I found it in Sophie's backpack. It was a photo of a drawing. It was a crude crayon picture of 2 stick figures holding hands. One was labeled me, the other Auntie Kate. Underneath, in wobbly kindergarten letters, it said, "Why are you mad?" I stared at the screen. My heart broke into jagged pieces. She had told them. She had told her 6-year-old daughter that I was mad at them. She was using Sophie's innocence as a heat-seeking missile to bypass my defenses. She was willing to inflict emotional trauma on her own child just to guilt-trip me into submission. It was a violation so profound it made me nauseous. She wasn't protecting her kids from this. She was dragging them into the trenches to use as sandbags. I typed a reply to Evan. My fingers were shaking. Do not send me things like this again. Evan. If she is telling the kids I am the reason she is in trouble, she is damaging them, not me. Keep them out of it. If you send me another message from her, I will report it as a violation of the no-contact order. I blocked his number for 24 hours. I needed silence. I needed to harden my heart. Because if I let the image of that drawing settle in, I would crumble. And I could not crumble. The day of the hearing arrived with a gray, relentless drizzle. It felt appropriate. I wore a navy blue suit. It was sharp, tailored, and professional. It was my armor. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun. I put on waterproof mascara. I was not going into that courtroom as a sister. I was going in as a victim of a crime, and as a professional protecting her reputation. The courthouse smelled of floor wax and anxiety. I met A.D., a Reynolds outside the double doors of courtroom 3B. She is here, Reynolds said quietly. She has retained a new lawyer, a guy named Henderson. He is aggressive, but he doesn't have much to work with. The evidence is too solid. I nodded. I am ready. We walked in. The room was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and cold. I walked to the bench on the left. I didn't look to the right. I forced myself to stare straight ahead at the judge's empty chair, but I could feel her. I could feel the heat of her gaze burning into the side of my face. Finally, I turned my head. Tessa sat at the defense table. She was wearing a gray cardigan and a modest skirt, a costume designed to scream suburban mother. But her face betrayed the costume. She wasn't crying. She didn't look remorseful. She didn't look like a woman who had been caught making a desperate mistake. She looked furious. Her jaw was set so hard, I could see the muscle jumping in her cheek. She was glaring at me with a hatred so pure it took my breath away. She looked at me like I was the thief, like I was the one who had broken the covenant. Evan sat in the gallery behind her, looking at his shoes. My parents were not there. I had told them not to come. I didn't want them to see this. All rise, the bailiff called out. Judge Holloway entered. He was an older man with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He sat down and opened the file. Case number 4922, the Commonwealth versus Tessa Marie Taylor. The proceedings were a blur of legal jargon. Motions were entered. Evidence was stipulated. Tessa's lawyer tried to paint a picture of a misunderstanding, of a family dispute blown out of proportion, of a mother trying to manage a crisis, but the facts were stubborn things. The facts were the video of the eye roll. The facts were the credit application. The facts were the wiped hard drive. Judge Holloway listened. He looked at the evidence. He looked at the video, which played on a monitor on his desk. I watched his expression as he saw Tessa drink my water and rifle through my desk. His eyebrows went up. He saw the arrogance. He saw the entitlement. Finally, He turned to Tessa. "Ms. Taylor," the judge said. His voice was deep and resonated through the quiet room. "You are facing serious charges here: identity theft, computer trespass, grand larceny. These are not minor infractions." Tessa stood up. Her lawyer stood with her. "Do you understand the gravity of what you have done?" the judge asked. "Do you understand that you violated the sanctity of your sister's home and threatened her livelihood?" The room went silent. This was the moment. This was the moment where a normal person would say, "I am so sorry. Your Honor, I made a terrible mistake. I was desperate." Tessa lifted her chin. She looked at the judge, and then she looked at me. "I understand that my sister cares more about her job and her vacation than she cares about her own family," Tessa said. Her voice was clear. It was steady. "I understand that I did what I had to do to survive, and she is punishing me for it because she has never had to struggle a day in her life." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a bridge not just burning, but exploding. She hadn't just failed to apologize. She had doubled down. She had walked into a court of law and claimed that her theft was a moral imperative and my justice was an act of cruelty. A D. A Reynolds stiffened beside me. Even Tessa's lawyer looked down at his table, closing his eyes briefly as if in physical pain. Judge Holloway stared at Tessa for a long, dangerous moment. He took off his glasses. He set them down on the bench. When he spoke, his voice was ice cold. "Ms. Taylor." In 20 years on the bench, I have heard many excuses, but I have rarely heard a defendant justify grand larceny with such breathtaking entitlement. You seem to labor under the delusion that your needs constitute a legal claim on other people's property. Let me disabuse you of that notion right now. He picked up his gavel. "I was going to consider a deferral program," he said, "but given your complete lack of remorse and your attempt to cast the victim as the villain, I am setting this for trial, and I am revoking your personal recognizance bond. You will be remanded into custody until a new bail hearing can be set with a secured bond." The gavel banged down. It sounded like a gunshot. Tessa's face went white. The arrogance vanished, replaced instantly by shock. "Wait," she stammered. "Custody? You mean—" "Jail. I have kids. I have to pick up my kids. You should have thought about your children before you committed felonies and then bragged about them in my courtroom," Judge Holloway said. The bailiff moved forward. He took Tessa's arms. He pulled them behind her back. I heard the metallic click-click of handcuffs. Tessa screamed. It wasn't a word. It was just a sound of pure, disbelief-fueled panic. She looked at Evan. Evan didn't move. She looked at me. "Caitlin," she shrieked. "Caitlin, stop this. Tell him you can't let them take me." I sat perfectly still. I watched the sister I used to adore being led away through the side door. I watched the door close. The silence rushed back into the room. I stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my suit. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like I had just survived a surgery to remove a limb. It was gone, and I would never be the same. But the infection was finally out of my body. I turned to Reynolds. "What happens next?" I asked. "Now," she said, gathering her files. "We prepare for the real fight. Because she is not going to forgive you for this." "I know," I said. I walked out of the courtroom alone. I checked my phone. I had a text from my dad. "Is it over?" I typed back one word. No, it wasn't over. But for the first time in my life, the terms of engagement were mine. The sentencing hearing took place 3 weeks later. The humidity of the courtroom felt heavy, pressing down on the rows of wooden benches like a physical weight. I sat in the front row, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, listening to the hum of the overhead lights. This was the end of the line. The plea deals had been discussed. The evidence had been weighed, and now, finally, the truth was going to have its moment in the sun. Tessa stood before Judge Holloway. She looked smaller than she had at the arraignment. The rage that had fueled her for weeks seemed to have burned itself out, leaving behind a charred, brittle shell. But when the judge asked if she had anything to say before he passed sentence, the spark ignited one last time. She did not turn to me. She did not look at our parents, who were huddled together in the back row like survivors of a natural disaster. She looked straight at the judge, and she finally stopped lying. "I did it because it was not fair," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. "Caitlin has everything. She has the money. She has the quiet apartment. She gets to wake up on a Saturday morning and decide what she wants to do. She gets freedom." She took a shuddering breath, her hands gripping the podium. "I do not get freedom," she continued, her voice rising slightly. "I wake up to screaming. I go to sleep to worrying. I have debt I cannot pay, and a husband who does not look at the bills and children who need things I cannot give them." I looked at her life, and I hated her for it. I wanted her to feel it. I wanted her to know what it feels like to be trapped. I wanted to take some of that safety away so she would understand. The courtroom was dead silent. It was the most honest thing she had ever said. She hadn't stolen my identity for money. Not really. She had stolen it because she wanted to consume my peace. She wanted to drag me down into the drowning pool so she wouldn't be the only one struggling to breathe. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was a vindication. Yes, but it was a horrific one. My sister did not love me. She resented my existence. Judge Holloway let the silence stretch for a long moment. He looked at Tessa over his reading glasses, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Taylor," he said slowly, "you speak of fairness, you speak of freedom, but you seem to be missing a fundamental truth of adulthood." He leaned forward. "Your sister's freedom is not a theft from you. Her choices did not build your cage. You built it yourself, choice by choice, day by day. And instead of taking responsibility for the life you created, you decided to cannibalize hers." He picked up a piece of paper. "Consequences are not emotions. Ms. Taylor, they are the mathematical results of actions. You wanted your sister to feel trapped. You have achieved the opposite. You have liberated her from the obligation of trusting you, and you have trapped yourself in the penal system." He read the sentence. It was heavy. It was real. Restitution in the amount of $12,400, covering the cost of the stolen items, the forensic recovery, and the legal fees. 5 years of probation, mandatory court-ordered counseling to address the underlying issues of entitlement and impulse control, and then, the final blow, a permanent restraining order. Tessa was legally forbidden from coming within 500 feet of my home, my workplace, or my person. She was forbidden from contacting me by phone, email, text, or third party. "If you violate this order," the judge warned, looking her dead in the eye, "you will go to jail. Do you understand?" Tessa nodded. She looked down at her hands. The defiance was gone, replaced by the crushing reality of the outcome. She had gambled her relationship with me for $5,000 and a sense of control, and she had lost everything. As the bailiff led her away to process the paperwork, the air in the room seemed to clear. It was over. I walked out of the courtroom and into the lobby. The first thing I did was check my phone. There was an email from Marcus at Juniper and Slate. The subject line was simply, "Cleared." I opened it. "Caitlin, the forensic audit is complete. We have matched the unauthorized access logs to the timeline of the theft established by the police report. Legal is satisfied that you were not the actor behind the breach. Your clearance is fully restored. The company will not be pursuing any action against you. Welcome back." I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for a month. My job was safe. My name was clean. Tessa had tried to burn down my professional reputation, but the truth had fireproofed it. I walked toward the exit, but I was stopped by a voice I knew better than my own. "Caitlin." I turned. My parents were standing there. My father looked 10 years older than he had in Puerto Rico. My mother's eyes were swollen. They looked at me, and for the first time in my life, they didn't look like the authority figures. They looked like people who had realized they had been reading the map upside down for 30 years. I braced myself. I expected the guilt trip. I expected them to ask me if I was happy now that the family was destroyed. But my father shook his head. "We were wrong," he said. He didn't whisper it. He didn't mumble it. He said it clearly, loudly enough for the passing lawyers to hear. "We were wrong. Caitlin, We created this. We told you to give, and we told her she deserved to take. We thought we were keeping the peace, but we were just feeding a monster." My mother stepped forward. She didn't try to hug me. She respected the invisible wall I had built. "I am so sorry we didn't protect you," she said, tears running down her face. "We should have believed you immediately. We shouldn't have needed a video to see the truth." I looked at them. I felt a strange sense of lightness. It wasn't forgiveness that would take years, if it ever happened at all, but it was acknowledgement. They had finally stopped gaslighting me. They had finally admitted that the sky was blue and the water was wet. "Thank you for saying that," I said. Evan was standing a few feet behind them. He looked like a ghost. He didn't come closer. He just looked at me and nodded. He knew. He knew that his silence had been the soil in which Tessa's entitlement grew. He had watched her spend money they didn't have. He had watched her abuse my kindness, and he had said nothing because it was easier. Now, he was going to have to raise 2 children with a wife on probation and a mountain of debt. He wasn't going to jail, but he was in a prison of his own making. I turned and walked out the heavy glass doors into the sunlight. The next day, I started the work of closing the book. I went to the post office. I packed a box for Milo and Sophie. I put in Lego sets for Milo and a drawing kit for Sophie. I put in a birthday card for each of them, even though their birthdays were months away. I didn't include a letter. I didn't include a message for Tessa or Evan. I mailed the box to my parents' house. They would deliver the gifts. They would make sure the kids got them without Tessa twisting the narrative. I loved my niece and nephew. I would always love them. But I had learned the hardest lesson of all: you cannot save children by drowning yourself. I could be their aunt from a distance. I could send love, but I could not send access. My front door was closed. I went back to my apartment. I called a locksmith. I didn't just change the cylinder this time. I had a high-security electronic lock installed, one that required a biometric fingerprint and a code that changed every time used it. I updated my camera system. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus, setting up a PIN that only I knew. I sat at my desk, the empty spot now filled with a new laptop provided by the company, and I opened a browser window. Tessa had said she wanted me to feel trapped. She wanted me to feel the weight of her choices. Instead, I felt lighter than air. I had lost a sister. But I had found myself. I had found the version of Caitlin who didn't apologize for existing. I had found the woman who could look a hurricane in the eye and say no. I navigated to a travel website. I didn't look for a group package. I didn't check with my parents' schedule. I typed in a destination I had always wanted to visit but never did, because Tessa said it was too far or too expensive or too selfish. Kyoto, Japan, 1 adult. I selected the dates. 2 weeks in the spring, when the cherry blossoms would be falling like pink snow. I clicked Book Now. The confirmation email hit my inbox with a satisfying ping. I sat back in my chair and looked out the window at the Richmond skyline. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in shades of purple and gold. I was alone. My family was fractured. My sister was a criminal. My history was scarred. But the lock on my door was solid. My bank account was secure, and my future belonged to me and me alone. Family is not a membership card that grants you the right to steal someone's time, their safety, or their identity. It is not a blank check that clears every debt of conscience, and it is certainly not a reason to let someone destroy you just because they dare to call it love. I had paid a high price for that lesson: $12,000, a stolen laptop, and a broken heart. But as I looked at the flight confirmation for Japan, I knew one thing for sure: it was worth it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long road to get here, but I am finally free. I would love to hear your thoughts. Where are you tuning in from today? Let's chat in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to support the channel, please make sure to subscribe to Emma Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button so more people can hear the truth. Stay safe, set your boundaries, and remember you are allowed to say no.